Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Health Tech with Purpose podcast, where we deep dive into the world of healthcare technology and people building innovation. I'm your host, Ayush, and today we have a truly exciting guest, Christie Callahan, CEO of Arrive Health. Christy is a health tech leader and has expertise in strategy, innovation, and operations. And she's spent over a decade tackling one of the healthcare's biggest pain points, which is prior authorization. She's here to help us unpack the challenges of prior authorization, the role of AI and automation, and what the future holds for patient access and transparency. Plus, we'll get to know a little bit about her journey and also her leadership philosophy. So let's get started. Christy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Christy, we always start with understanding a bit of your own background and your journey into healthcare. How did you got into healthcare? Did you always envision to be here, or like how did your career start? Yeah, please tell us more.
Okay, sounds good. The short answer is no, I didn't think I would end up in healthcare. In school, I was an engineer.
Okay.
And I was actually working in manufacturing. I was working on the Puffs tissue line in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Um, but as you know, as a young 20 something, I wanted more variety and had been interested in consulting kind of throughout college. So I ended up joining Bain and Company, and consulted with them for a while, but that wasn't a good fit either. And so I got recruited out of Bain by CVS. And at the time, they were building almost like a SWAT team, Ayush, to come in and help kind of come in alongside the operations and help solve problems when there was an issue. So when I joined the Silver Script plan, which is a Medicare Part D plan, was in sanctions with CMS. And we needed to come in, fix the tech, fix the processes, help the operations team get back on track while they were underwater processing enrollments and premium billing and all that kind of stuff. From there, I jumped into coverage determinations and appeals, which is, the prior auth version of Medicare Part D. For a similar thing, we were being audited by CMS. We had client audits, and the team really needed support in terms of automation of their workflows and use of better integrated technology to improve their pace, to reduce the load, and to
Which
support the
years were
team in
these?
making decisions.
Was it pre-COVID or which years are we talking about?
Pre-COVID, yeah. Um, Yes, far before COVID. And so I was with CVS for a while, and I kind of, in my time, I got to see the specialty and mail pharmacies, the call center, the prior auth operation, obviously. Um, and along the way, I met Arrive Health. And, I think what I realized in working for the PBM was the problems I was trying to solve for patients. I could make it better from a, time to resolution perspective within the PBM, but I couldn't actually fix root cause, which was the providers having better information and the providers having a better workflow to kind of clear that path for patients. So when I met Arrive, it was a really good fit with, the way I wanted to try to tackle this problem from a different perspective. And at this point, we were mid-COVID, we were all remote, and there was, an opportunity to join Arrive and not have to move to Denver. So it was a good it was a set of a lot of good things coming together at the same time.
Right. Great. So you found your calling. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I do think, what's been fun is truly getting closer to that decision point, getting closer to the providers and the patients, and trying to, where I think we have so much opportunity. And the reason that I've stayed in healthcare, maybe, why did I stay here? The problems are big, but they do feel solvable. And I think that's, like that's what gets me out of bed in the morning is super complicated. There are a lot of competing priorities, but it's not unsolvable. And so it's fun to be, tackling this problem from a different perspective of how can we share that information better? How can we use technology to make it simpler? And how can we get patients the medications they need?
I like the way you look at it, like problems are big but solvable. So there's that silver lining that exists in health, which I think
That's
keeps
right.
all of us moving and working towards one solution at a time.
That's right. And I tell the team, all you need is a glimmer. If there's a glimmer of a solution out there, we can make it happen.
Right, right, right. And then you are in a boardroom selling to a CXO. So, and they have their own ideas.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
So great, Christy. Let's talk prior authorization because
Okay.
that has been really your deep expertise. And why not you start by giving us a bit of a big breakdown about why prior authorization exists and why it's such a persistent challenge.
Big question. Let's start with maybe why it exists. Uh, so specifically around medications, that's what we're focused on, right? There are usually three reasons that a prior auth gets put in place. One is safety. For some reason, there's something about this medication that where, there needs to be safety monitoring, whether that be dosing related, maybe there's you kind of ramp up on the med. It could be addiction related, right? I think about sleep medications, when the plan sees that they're being used every day, they throw a prior authorization basically to alert the doctor and say, hey, looks like this is being used every day. Are you sure you want to continue? Um, the second is off-label use. And I think this is the one that probably has the most swirl around it, which is drugs that are really popular for off-label use. And a lot of times have good results, but just aren't validated, don't have the research at this point. The plan typically doesn't want to pay for that off-label use, right? They're saying they're not proven outcomes. I don't know that this is going to be, beneficial to your overall health. And so from this perspective, unless you can prove a few things, we're not gonna pay for the medication for off-label use. Great example of this right now is our GLP-1s, right? Ozempic, Wegovy, right? People want to use it for weight loss, fine. But that's not the reason the plan is paying for it. They're paying for diabetes. And then the third is cost. And I think it is, it is infrequently used um, because they use plan design in other ways to do that, but sometimes there is a PA driven by cost, right? And typically it's saying, all right, you got to meet some threshold, some kind of unprecedented thresholds. You have to have tried other meds before you're stepping up to this more expensive therapy. You have to show that you've tried the lower cost options, they're not working, and therefore, you really do need this more expensive med. And I think, if I put on my plan hat, they would say two things, right? One, trying to make sure that patients are getting the best health outcomes and that they're helping providers that are overwhelmed by the amount of patients and diagnoses that they see. And two, that they're trying to keep premiums low for everybody, which means, spending less out of pocket. Now, obviously, there are many different sides to that, but that's my plan hat telling you why prior authorization exists. Um, why is it a challenge was the second part of your question.
As while because like in theory it's a great thing basically because it kind of brings predictability for everyone, but in fact the numbers show that up to 82% of the appeals get overturned. So why it has been a challenge, what are those inefficiencies? Let's touch upon that.
Yeah. Um, I think the best way to highlight why this is a challenge is to use our data. So in 6 months, we saw 416,000 unique combinations of drug and plan. Um, That's insane, right? That think about the complexity for a single provider. And now obviously a single provider isn't prescribing every drug, but the point is you have 416,000 combination, essentially 416,000 unique prior authorizations, right? How can you keep that straight? Um, you can't. And I think, there are two things that cause the challenge. One is it doesn't it doesn't feel predictable to providers and patients. It's um, for them, it feels inconsistent. It feels hard to understand. Sometimes there's a PA, sometimes there's not. Why? Why not? And then the second is the criteria is varied enough that they often don't understand, what essentially what's expected or what's being asked for. A good example is a lab result, right? So you're going through your authorization, you need to have a certain lab. You put in the results of the lab and the date it was taken. Well, maybe for this plan, that lab needs to have been done in the last 3 months. And your lab was done in the last 9 months, right? Okay, well, clearly you don't meet the criteria because of timing, because you didn't know that, that you needed a fresh lab in order to submit and get access to your medication. And so in that case, to your point, you get denied. You then understand, oh, this lab needed to be done in the last 3 months. Then you're going back, you're getting your lab done, you're submitting for appeal, and of course you're getting approved because your labs are showing the same thing. You're still within the eligible criteria. You just needed to kind of check this procedural box. And I think that's where the frustration lies, which is I think I've done everything right. But there's something small in the administration that then causes this denial appeal loop that it is burdensome. It's time
So, like
intensive for
adding
the
more
plan and the
complexity
providers.
to the already 100 times complex system. So basically, it's another loop that people are required to go through. And I think not surprisingly, in fact, there's in fact a demand of getting rid of all of it together. So, what is your take? Like, of course, I mean, you are building solutions and you are, helping prior authorization really be more useful. But like, what is your take? How do you see it in a neutral ground? Like, is it really helping? Is it really too complicated? Or does it requires probably a complete overhaul of the things? So where do you see current
Good
things?
question. Um, I think it's a mix. I think like any complicated problem, there are a
Not
lot of
one
things that
solution.
probably
Yeah.
should change. Yeah. I think there are some instances where um, authorizations persist that probably don't apply anymore, that you know, should have gotten taken away a long time ago because now we know more about the medication and that kind of thing. I do think at an individual level, people are trying to do the right thing, right? The P&T committees within plans are really thoughtful about what they're trying to do. But I mean, that being said, when you know, you have these massive plans, I think things slip through the cracks. And so there is on the plan side, I think there should be some simplification. And I think there's a reason to um, kind of take a close look at what has an auth and why. What's what I'm excited about is I think the providers have kind of been takers. Like they just kind of got to take what's given, right? This is the question set and like I've just got to get it done, right? And what I'm really hopeful about is our technology is finally in a place where I think we can flip that a bit in that we can make it work so much better for providers. Until now, the only real innovation in prior auth has been EPA, right? Electronic prior auth. And that's fine. It's faster than fax. But it still doesn't, there's no real support for the provider, right? You are still answering these questions. You still don't have visibility into the requirements. You're still getting pushed in these denial appeal loops. And so while it is a little more efficient, it's not actually lightening the load. And that's where I'm excited. I feel like, we're finally in a position where we can,
Right. And
our
I think
systems
that's
can
where
talk to each other.
exactly like your solutions like Arrive, Accelerate come in, like which are simplifying prior authorization. So
Yeah.
maybe, tell us more about Arrive, Accelerate and what's like your thesis around building the solution and, the way you are approaching about solving prior authorization than anybody else.
Yeah. Um, Good question. Good segue. Um, the first thing that is like really core to what we do is we believe the best auth is no auth. And so it really starts with how can we help doctors avoid prior auth entirely. So that is, what is the formulary? What are those other drugs that a patient could be on? And so when you think about the pieces of this tech, Ayush, you have real-time benefits out of the box. It's fine. It doesn't work great. Mostly because our pharmacists in the pharmacy setting do so much to make those claims pay. And so the first step that we've taken is, hey, we need to use computers in the way that they can be used, right? We need to build models, and we need to have an intelligence layer that replicates that makes sure that the claim is paying so that we're delivering options to the provider when they're prescribing, real options that they can switch to. And I think what's most exciting in that is when it's done well,
Mhm.
we're seeing providers avoid 48% of PAs, which is wild, right? When there's an opportunity to switch, they really want to switch. So that's part one. Part two is then how can we bring a solution that gives them the answers up front, that tells them exactly what they're going to have to fulfill. And so we've built a series of large language models using Claude Sonnet and a few others um, to extract from the coverage requirement documents exactly what that criteria is, summarized in a way that's easy and quick
Mhm.
to read and digest, but that tells you at the beginning of the prior auth process exactly what you're going to have to do. So my example of that lab test, being 9 months instead of 6 months old, you know that before you even start the question set. And so that is the second, right? How can we bring intelligence in using our generative AI tools to bring that clarity and bring that transparency so that people can cancel. At that point, you can say, oh, I'm not going to start that PA. I'm going to cancel. I'm going to tell the patient to go update their labs, and I'll come back when I know I can get approval. So I don't have to do this deny appeal nonsense, right? And then the third is we really believe there shouldn't ever be a denied claim at the pharmacy. And what I mean by that is as soon as you have a denied claim at the pharmacy, you start all these extra loops around pharmacists trying to help, um, and around all these other people getting involved in the process, right? And if we can truly, script is written, auth is resolved, script is sent to the pharmacy in hours, then we don't need that. The pharmacists don't have to carry that burden, and the patients don't have to be confused and delayed by denied claim at the pharmacy. And so that's what we've built, and it's been a wild ride. We have two awesome health systems that have
Nice.
been really good partners throughout the process. But it's working. We're getting to resolution in about 4 hours. I'll give the plan some credit. They're good at getting decisions back timely. And so, between a good workflow within the health system and the PBMs and plans, being really responsive, I think there's a real path forward.
Right. Great. So, one thing I'd like to want you to elaborate more is about AI because
Yeah.
you've been prominently using AI to solve some of the prior auth challenges that have existed. As a
Mhm.
practitioner yourself, I would like to understand from you, like what has been your experience with AI in terms of the kind of results that are coming, and what I'm coming from is that what kind of what are things you find excellent currently? What are the things you find still need to improve in an AI implementation for prior auth? And what are the things that still you feel AI is far behind as of now, at least? Of course, it keeps changing, so I won't say 2 years or 5 years, but what is your take with AI implementations for the space?
Okay. Yeah, good question. I think just before I give you an opinion, I think some of this is the tech itself. Some of it too, though, is organizational readiness
Right.
to accept or implement the tech. And so I think it is a little bit of both, because some of the constraints I see are also just our collective willingness and readiness to let AI do some stuff. And so what do I think it's good at? Um, I think it's really good as as an assistant, right? I think we have proven that it can um, really help um, r- essentially be a sophisticated search
Augment
engine, right?
intelligence. Yeah.
No doubt. Like that is a proven and well thought about use case. I think in healthcare, we need to better understand how we feel about PHI in our models because there continues to be conversation about,
Right.
and I think we've gotten past a lot of it, but there continues to be conversation about, am I going to put PHI or let the model see PHI, right? And therefore truly be um,
How have you
kind of that
handled that
augmentation.
currently? If you can elaborate, how have you handled the PHI aspect for your model trainings, etc.? If
We
that's
don't today.
okay.
We don't today.
Okay.
Yeah, we've avoided it. We'll have to tackle it at some point. But for now, our model has been put against the coverage requirements documents, which are, the policies, the plan documents, which are universal to the plan.
Right.
And so And then the model output is then what gets inserted into the kind of normal and PHI rich prior auth flow. But it's totally separate. The model did its work over here, and then the summary is inserted separately. Um, so I think that's a spot that we've got to figure it out. I also think that I think we're getting better at quality. I think we're learning a lot about how to, from a prompt engineering perspective, what loops to put in post action in order to validate the output. And so when I think about our model that we've built, right, we've got three subsequent loops with other LLMs that are kind of validating the output and making sure that it didn't have any hallucinations and it got everything that it needed to. And that is a spot where as as those quality loops continue to improve and as our prompt engineering continues to improve, we'll need less clinical or manual oversight in terms of validating quality output. So I'm really optimistic about that. Um, and then I think the last piece, and I think this is probably farthest away, is I don't think we're going to let it make decisions for a long time by itself in healthcare. And I think there's probably some good and probably some bad in that, right? Which is, I'm not sure but I'd love your thoughts if you can think of a scenario. I'm not sure there are cases where we're going to say, oh yeah, let the AI agent go do X, Y, and Z. I think at least at this point, it's a it's a human assist tool, not a
Mm.
autonomous action tool.
Right. Right.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, even from our works also and implementations, we are seeing pretty much the same. Again, trying to avoid touching the PHI aspect as much as possible. In fact, we have been building solutions more around patient education, etc., rather than care plans itself. Though, again, the technology exists to be able to, like build upon it and be able to be helpful in that space. But it's a very gray area in the sense like how do you really manage PHI if it is getting fed to the AI? And I
Yeah,
think again for all innovators, it is better to pick the low-lying fruit and get started and get it going rather than waiting for
that's right.
some perfect day to come. But I would
I think
really like to dig upon your experiences around taking the solution to the market because
sure.
that's one of the biggest problem for most digital innovators.
Sure.
Tech can definitely do a lot of things, but tell us like your experience. How did you get the providers and the payers to actually implement? You mentioned you have two health systems using the solution. So any personal experiences, how did you get on the commercial side with that?
Yeah. Um, so I think what we learned, so on the real-time benefit side of our business, we do about 22 million transactions a month, right? We've got hundreds of thousands of providers, and I think what we learned in that is what we don't need in healthcare is more apps, interfaces, portals, specifically for the provider workflow. And so if you are, seeking to have influence on the provider workflow, you need to be as natively embedded in the EMR as possible. And so that has been both good and bad. I mean, it has
A
meant that
painful
this has been a
journey.
long growth journey.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's a painful journey in itself.
It
Getting it.
is. It's long. It's long. Um, and it also means that, as a product person, it hurts a little bit because you have no control of the interface, right? You influence it, but it's not yours. And so what we have gotten really good at, I think, is tight feedback loops with our health system partners to understand the interface, understand how it's working and where it's not working, and improve, garbage in, garbage out, improve the input data so that it's actually, working with the EMR system in such a way that we're getting the outcomes that we expect. And so when you talk about adoption, right, how am I going to get a provider to use this tool? We have sought to we have sought for our solutions to almost not need training. And that's a stretch. You're going to need a little bit of change management on training in it on anything, right? But truly, um, our solutions are are so native in the EMR that it's, when the system decides to use it, it's their workflow. And so when we talk about EPA, right, we have it kind of in two different ways. In one, there's a centralized team. In one, it's distributed at the clinics. In both cases, that solution is the new workflow. It's a part of the process. It's embedded within that EMR. Um, and like anything, there are a few bumps at the beginning, but truly, as that change happens, it's been fantastic. I think the other thing that I will say is, part of what's really helped is creating this urgency around prior auth by not sending that script to the pharmacy, by saying, hey, the script is being held for you to resolve the auth, and then it'll release out to the pharmacy. There's some rules to make sure that there's no patient impact, of course, but it's really created a sense of urgency for that adoption in order to say, yeah, I've got to do something, I've got to pick this up, I've got to keep it moving, so that the patient can get their med. And so that was a little bit long-winded,
Oh,
but
that's
hopefully
that's
makes
a
sense
smart
in
way
terms
to
of our
navigate.
approach.
Yeah. Okay.
What's that?
that's a smart way to navigate. Again,
Yeah,
the solution would have its own journey, but again, in health, more than any other industry, building is one thing, but getting to market and being able to, make people really use the product um, is an skill, or is a mountain in itself. So that has to be climbed. So great.
maybe the last, yeah, maybe the last thing I'll say on that is we have used the standards where they exist. And that doesn't mean they're
Exactly.
perfect. Yeah, it doesn't mean they're perfect out of the box. They're not. Um, but they're a great starting point. And I think
Right.
really getting deep in those standards and then learning, okay, how can I make this work better? What can I, how can I augment it to make it unique and
Mm.
to drive our own differentiation? But those standards they're a good starting point for interoperability and to unlock opportunities, reduce custom builds, all that kind of stuff.
Right, right. Yeah. No, definitely. In fact, we share the same philosophy, telling our customers that clinicians would not use a software if it is a standalone software, basically. So it has to
Yeah,
be embedded within the ecosystem. And but as I said, like building a solution takes a few months, and then integration of it in itself is a long journey. So for
it
many
is. You're
startups,
right.
definitely big struggle. So let's switch gears a bit, Christy. Talk to us about your leadership philosophy. You have built and led high-performing teams. I've seen, in fact, the journey of Arrive Health, and you guys have been doing a fantastic job. That's the least I can say. So,
Thank
what's your
you.
leadership philosophy building your team?
Oh,
And
good
how do you manage
question.
your team performance? What are some of the things that you do? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think about my job as the leader in two ways. One, um, to really unlock and help people perform at their best, whatever that looks like for them. So that's a combination of making sure folks are in the right role, making sure they have the tools they need, and making sure that teams are, the teams are coming together and functioning cohesively, and in a way that allows for the whole business to move forward, right? I think often cross-functional communication is a spot of focus because we're all so dependent on one another to reach an outcome, but come with like vastly different perspectives on what's most important. And so we spend a lot of time on that. I think the second is I really think about my role as being a thought partner. And so I spend a lot of time um, in the weeds. Not because I think I'm better at solving the problem, but because I can help the team by asking questions and bringing a truly outside voice to the problem that we're trying to solve. And so um, I think the team would say that's usually helpful. Sometimes it gets us down rabbit holes, but mostly helpful. And so um, in
So,
that way, I would also say, oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
I did not wanted to interrupt your thought, but I was just thinking of that thing. Like as leaders, most of our work becomes eventually like connecting the dots. So basically, people may
Yeah,
be picking different dots, but then you could come in and enable, connection of those dots uh, that which eventually creates the magic. So, just resonating with that, as you said about
yeah,
in with that outside perspective to help the team. Yeah.
yeah, it's a good point. That is another thing uh that I think is like so important. I spend so much time trying to share context. And I really do have this philosophy that like nothing nothing shouldn't be shared with everybody and anybody because information is the only way we're going to make decisions, the right decisions, all to your point, all the way up and down the organization. And so yes, part of being a thought partner is immense context sharing and making sure everybody has the same information.
Right. Great. Christy, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights on prior auth, healthcare innovation, and your journey. Before we wrap up, where can our listeners learn more about Arrive Health and follow your work? What's the most active social network for you?
Yeah, I think follow us on LinkedIn, and go to our website, arrivehealth.com. On our website, you can find all of our thought leadership and blogs and podcasts like this. And then on LinkedIn, you can see kind of our more recent activity.
Thank you so much, Christy. To our listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Stay tuned for more conversations. And until next time, take care and keep innovating.